Hello and welcome to this special edition of Broadcast and Beyond. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus on the 1st of April appears to have lit a fuse. Now, as a reprisal to the consulate bombing, Iran carried out an unprecedented airstrike using missiles and drones on Israel. And to tell us as to how things could potentially unfold from here on in the region, we're being joined by Mr. John Bolton, who served as the National Security Advisor under the Trump administration and who also served as the United States' ambassador to the United Nations from the years 2005 till 2006. Now, Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. And let me, in fact, start off by asking you this. In your assessment, how serious do you think the situation in West Asia is at this moment after, quote-unquote, Iran carried out its unprecedented direct attack on Israel? And also, what do you think is likely to be the Israeli response for the Iranian missile and drone attack?
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's very serious. I think it's been very serious since the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th. I think Iran is the puppet master here, having armed and equipped and trained and financed all these terrorist groups in the region: Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and obviously Iran's own military capability have been pressing what the Iranians themselves call the ring of fire strategy around Israel. So the attack on Saturday, although often characterized as an Iranian response to the Israeli strike at Quds Force, Iranian Quds Force officers in Damascus, I think is simply part of the ongoing larger conflict that began on October the 7th. But what Iran did that really did cross a red line was this was an attack launched primarily from Iranian territory against the territory of Israel. And so this is now a classic state-to-state definition of an act of war. The Israeli government's under enormous pressure by the U.S., the UK, and others, first, not to retaliate at all, which is a waste of time. They will retaliate, but perhaps more significantly, outside pressure to limit the Israeli response. I can't predict how effective that pressure will be, but I can tell you it has been intense. I think Israel will respond. I think they will respond with an attack on Iranian territory to show that Iran can attack them and not escape the consequences. I'd say looking at taking out the bases from which the Saturday missiles and drones were launched, taking out associated air defenses, and maybe some other targets, Revolutionary Guard or conventional military headquarters, perhaps some attacks on Iran's oil infrastructure. And the big unknown question is, will Israel go after Iran's nuclear weapons program? Perhaps not kinetically, not through missiles and bombs, but by a cyber attack. So all of these things are potential. The best news we have, and we don't have much, is that Israel has probably decided on what its response will be, and the question now is timing.
All right, interesting. Now, Iran has now threatened to use a never-used-before weapons if Israel decides to attack Iran again. Now, what weapons do you think Iran is referring to here when it says never-before-used weapons? Do you think Iran has crossed the nuclear threshold with which it is perhaps now threatening Israel?
I don't think they have nuclear weapons yet, but I do think, as your question implies, that the threat is to use nuclear weapons. And I think we should all be clear. Always a lot of discussion: how quickly can Iran manufacture a nuclear weapon? The answer is they don't need to manufacture it. They can buy it from North Korea for whatever price North Korea will try and extract from them. So this is why Israel's decision is significant, not simply in response to Saturday's attack from Iran, but out of the legitimate concern that Israel has that the next time they see ballistic missiles aimed at Israel from Iran, they have to worry that under the nose cones would be a nuclear device. So I think what they're looking for is how to deter Iran from thinking about exactly the kind of threat you just mentioned.
Now, there's a lot of chatter that's in fact ongoing about the nature of the Israeli response that's likely to be. A lot of people are indicating that one of the targets that Israel could hit are Iran's nuclear sites. But the obvious counter to that is, is it not evident that if Israel attacks Iranian nuclear sites, then Iran would hit back at Israel's nuclear site in Dimona in the Negev desert?
Well, look, this is one. You're right. This is one of many questions Israel has to ask itself. It has to worry whether it could face retaliation from Hezbollah in Lebanon, with tens of thousands, some estimated 120,000 missiles that Hezbollah has. But on Saturday, the Israeli government issued warnings to its civilian population in key areas and in and around big cities, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, near many of Israel's military bases, but also to residents in and around Dimona, where the reactor is. So we don't know, and obviously Israel doesn't say much about it, but that's at least some indication that in Israel they perceive Dimona to have been subject of the attack on Saturday, apparently not successfully. But in other words, it may have been Iran that crossed the red line of attacking the nuclear program of Israel first.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, this is where it gets, pretty difficult to, in fact, see as to how things could proceed from here. But now I want to, in fact, talk a bit about the reports of what, in fact, happened on Saturday night. According to reports in, for instance, an Israeli paper such as Haaretz, it's been said that 5 Iranian missiles actually managed to strike the Nevatim airbase, while 4 Iranian missiles struck the Negev airbase in the south. So when Iran fired these missiles after giving due notice to the state of Israel and also to its allies, do you think Israel here is making the mistake of perhaps underestimating the missile capability for the Iranians? Because the Iranians are saying that they have missiles that can actually strike Israel in a span of less than 400 seconds.
Right. I don't think they gave due notice. I mean, I think the Iranians gave a general indication they were going to respond, and I don't think anybody was surprised. That figure of 9 missiles obviously is a little bit higher than what actually hitting their target, higher than what the U.S. and Israel have said, that the contention has been that we destroyed 99% of the incoming missiles. And if my math is correct, and 9 actually got through, that's more like a 97% success rate. But it's an indication that that these missiles obviously can cause significant damage. There was other reporting you may have seen in the Wall Street Journal and then late yesterday by CBS, citing unnamed American officials, that of the 120 ballistic missiles Iran, approximately 120 ballistic missiles Iran launched on Saturday, half blew up on the launch pad or crashed before they got to Israel.
Right.
So those figures obviously aren't considered as having been shot down by Israeli and U.S. missile defenses, and the impact of 60 missiles that never made it to Israel, had they landed on targets, could have been considerable. So I think I rather doubt Israel is underestimating the threat. I think it may be the Biden administration that's underestimating the threat.
Right. And also, Ambassador, in your assessment, do you think Israel can actually fight a war against Iran on its own and still win? Because even in the Gaza offensive, what is pretty evident is that Tel Aviv, to a very large extent, has been relying on the weapons that have been transferred by the United States of America in the Gaza Strip.
Well, I think Israel doesn't want to have to rely simply on its own resources, because it probably could not. And for all the limits that the Biden administration has been trying to place on Israel, including on this very question we're discussing, what Israel's response should be, Biden has also continued to say we would provide what was necessary for Israel defense. I think it would be a huge political mistake for Biden to try and distance himself from Israel when it comes to defense, whether he assists them in attacking Iran or not. So I don't think Israel really faces that threat. If it did, I think there'd be overwhelming congressional opposition to Biden cutting them off. I mean, this is a delicate time in the U.S. because the Democratic Party is deeply divided over what Biden is doing. I think,
Ambassador, if I can just interrupt you there, the question of whether the United States can stay away from this war is a separate one. The question that I'm asking you is this: can Israel fight a war on its own, relying on its own weapons and ammunition, without relying on American-supplied weaponry?
Well, I don't know. I think the answer to that's no, but I don't think that's a realistic possibility, for the reasons I've been saying, because I think it would be a political crisis in the United States if Biden really abandoned Israel.
But he's in fact, there are reports that have again appeared in American media which have stated quite clearly that Joe Biden, during his phone call with Netanyahu, said that the United States will not participate in a counterattack by Israel on Iran. Realistically speaking, looking at how things have unfolded over the course of the last 7 decades since the end of since the creation of the State of Israel, can Washington stay out of a war in which Israel is involved?
What Biden is distinguishing between, and I think it's a legitimate distinction, erroneous on his part, but a difference between aiding Israel and attacking Iran on the one hand versus aiding Israel in defending against subsequent Iranian attacks or subsequent attacks by the terrorist groups. I think Biden's wrong on not assisting Israel in the retaliation against Iran. And at some point when a country like Israel lives under this continuous threat, the only realistic way to end the threat is to defeat the enemy. And I don't think we're at that point yet.
Right.
But it's not unrealistic to think that from Israel's point of view, as Winston Churchill once said to the British people, without victory, there is no survival. And for a country whose ancestors went through the Holocaust in Germany, in World War II, the thought of a nuclear holocaust from Iran is highly motivating.
It's important that you point out to the possibility of a nuclear holocaust, which brings me to my next question. Now, Israel has said that it will, of course, attack Iran in response to the attack that took place last Saturday. The Iranians have said that they would, of course, hit back with much greater force. That brings me to the question, can Iran and Israel now fight a non-nuclear war? Or do you think any contest that breaks out between Tehran and Tel Aviv has the potential to spiral into a nuclear conflagration?
Well, if we're talking about the conflict right now, I think it's unlikely. I don't think Israel would use nuclear weapons unless it felt that it faced the potential of a nuclear attack. Right now, I don't think Iran has nuclear weapons, but as I said before, I think they could get them easily from North Korea, and I think time is not on Israel's side. It lives in a very dangerous neighborhood facing a number of enemies. I think Iran has certainly the tacit backing and support in many other ways from the new China-Russia axis that's been forming over the past year. And so the situation in the Middle East, and not just for Israel, but for the Gulf Arab oil-producing states as well, they're inside that ring of fire that Iran has created as well.
And also, let's talk a bit about the stance that the regional powers such as Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have taken. Can these nations openly back the state of Israel and still survive the wrath of their local population in case Israel and Iran were to go to war?
Well, I think so. And I think in the Gulf Arab states in particular, they know that what happened when Hamas attacked Israel was not an Israeli-Arab war or even an Israeli-Palestinian war. It was an Iranian war launched at Israel. And they know exactly who is responsible for this. There's, I think, no sentiment among the leaderships of the Gulf Arab countries to do anything other than continue along the path of the Abraham Accords and expand them. They and Israel share the same strategic perception that the biggest threat to all of them is the regime in Tehran.
That is the perception of the Arab leadership. But the sentiment on the Arab street, the local Arab population, does not appear to be in concurrence with how the Arab leaders have, of course, in many ways participated in striking down the Iranian missiles and drones that were fired on Saturday night. Do you think a nation such as Jordan can actually continue to remain on the Israeli side? Can it afford to do that?
Well, I think so far the evidence is that the Arab street has been very quiet. Now, anything's subject to change, but at the moment, I just don't see that Israel is as isolated in the region as people think. The threat of Iranian terrorism is very real for the people in the Arab world as well as the leaders.
Now, my final question to you, Ambassador, is this. In case this war just blows up into a wider war in the Middle East, what does it mean for the Abraham Accords? Because potentially what we're looking at is the restructuring of the balance of power in the Middle East as we know it.
I think Iran would be very ill-advised to step up its hostilities with Israel. Israel's a small country, but I think the regime in Iran is as unpopular as it has been in the over 40 years since the Islamic Revolution came to power in 1979. I think the population is very, very much opposed to the regime, and I think the instability of the regime could turn into a real crisis inside Iran if much more military pressure is applied. So the unpopularity of the regime, I think, has to be on their mind as they in Iran as they consider what to do.
But what happens to the Abraham Accords in case there is an all-out war that consumes several regions in the Middle East? What happens to the Abraham Accords?
Well, it depends on what the all-out war is. If it's against Iran, I think the Abraham Accords are secure. In fact, I think when this current war is over, I think the negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Israel are likely to resume. Remember, as I think you mentioned, on Saturday night, Saudi Arabia participated in the arrangement the U.S. Central Command had negotiated to work together with Israel, the UK, France, and the United States as part of our missile defense activities. It worked very well.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Bolton, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.